annotated bibliography portion of the independent study. This is often the most misunderstood portion of the independent study that students struggle with, and hopefully after watching this session, you will have a much better understanding and be less intimidated by this portion of it, and more so be able to write an excellent annotated bibliography for your independent study. I am Mr. Gullickson, one of your film teachers. So as a bit of review to look at the components of the independent study, there are three components of it, a 100-word rationale, the main portion of it, which is the script portion, the documentary script portion of the independent study, and then the annotated list of sources, or the bibliography. And Mr. Toombs covered a lot of great points in terms of the script itself, the rationale, and touched on the annotated bibliography. I'm going to go more in depth with the annotated list of sources bibliography during this session. So what I'm going to cover specifically about the annotated bibliography is what is it, why is it necessary, and how is it written? And specifically, how is it written for this particular assessment? So we'll start off with, what is it? Well, if you break it down, and this probably will be the first time, if it's not the first time you've written an annotated bibliography, what it means to annotate something is to add notes, and a bibliography is a list of sources that's referred to in a scholarly work. So your independent study, your documentary script, is a scholarly work on film history and or film theory. And so when you write a scholarly work, you need to list the sources that contributed to and influenced your arguments in that work. So in the IB Film Guide, there is a definition of what it is, and here's a little example of what one would look like. And we're going to break this down here a little bit into parts. So what is it? It's a list of materials used in researching the topic and all the material used in the documentary itself. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but briefly, it's anything that you used that contributed to your argument, anything you cited, and anything that you're showing visually or that you're playing as audio in your documentary script. It's, like I said, a list of material used in researching the topic, any material used in the documentary, and this could include written material or print material, which could be books, articles, written information from the internet, extracts from the films that you're showing or analyzing, and then any quotes from experts or academics. These could come from audio interviews or interviews that you find on the internet, or it could be written interviews and articles in magazines. And of the IB definition from the IB Film Guide is that the annotation, so the notes, should give the source, so where it came from, where did you get it, or location, so it could be the time that it's found, say on a DVD commentary or on a DVD or a film itself or a video file or whatever it is. So say 32 minutes, 18 seconds. And then a comment on the relevance of the source may be included. Now, while the IB guide says may be included, it must be included. This is really a requirement for this portion of the independent study. It's very important, which I'll go into next. Why is this necessary? Why do people write annotated bibliographies when they write a scholarly work, a research paper, in this case, a documentary script? Why is it necessary? So I'm going to go over 4 points here. The first is that it provides evidence to the reader of your understanding of the relevance of the sources and how they contribute to your argument. So instead of just listing sources and not having any evidence of how you use those or how it contributed to your thoughts or your arguments about the topic, the annotations would provide that. So it also demonstrates how thorough you were in your research, that you weren't superficial about finding just whatever came up first on a Google search, that you actually went in depth and you tried to dig deep and find sources that really contributed to your arguments and really developed your thought about the topic. So that list of annotated sources, you can see how academic they are, how deep you went in your research, and how persistent you were in that process. So your audience in this case is an IB examiner, so you have to keep that in mind, but your audience is also film students, people that are interested in film theory, film history, and as they read your documentary script, or if it were an actual documentary film, then this annotated bibliography would provide insight to them of how you applied that source within that script. And then this is probably the most important one that is often overlooked, because a lot of students approach the annotated bibliography as just something extra that you do at the end after you've written the whole thing. Students might approach it in terms of, oh, yeah, I got to do that thing at the end, and often things at the end you just kind of skim over and you don't invest the time and the effort you need to make it worthwhile. And this is the reason it's worthwhile, is that if you are annotating your sources during the process of writing the independent study, it's going to encourage you to be more intentional about how you use those sources and how you're using it as a means to support your arguments within your documentary script. So maybe the part you've been waiting for is, how do you write this thing? How is it written? So I'm going to refer to the example that is posted in the assignment directions. There's a link at the bottom of this, so you can also look at the full version of this. I have an abridged version here coming up in a minute. But just to make sure I distinguish between a couple of things here, and this is true in any research paper, the difference between references or works cited is these are sources that you refer to or you cite or you quote from directly, where a bibliography is a list of materials that you've consulted, and you may or may not use those, but you need to list those so that the audience, or the reader in this case, knows what has influenced your arguments within the paper. So there's the structure of how it's written. The example that we're going to look at here starts off with the works cited, or as Mr. Toombs refers to it in his live session, the B-roll, which would be excerpts, quotes, commentary extracts, direct references, any one of those things that is directly referred to or cited within the script. And the annotated bibliography would include both written and print materials, like I mentioned before, anything that you read, whether it's from the web or a book or an article from a magazine or a journal, and electronic, which would include that as well. So here's a works cited example. You can see, of course, that this can be traced back to the source. So if the reader or the audience wanted to find the source themselves, that it would be easy for them to find it through following back this information. Now, there's plenty of sources out there on how to do this. Your face-to-face school might have guidelines in terms of how you do this. The general rule is that it should be easy for the reader to follow this back to the source. One thing that's different about this, that might be different than when you've maybe done this in a different course, is that you'll be including video or audio material. So you might need to do a little bit more research in terms of finding out how do you list or cite a movie, a audio clip, an interview. So here is part of the example of the annotated bibliography, and like I mentioned before, it's abridged. I put 2 written sources so you could see those, and then an electronic source. But you can look at the example to see some more here. And notice that besides the reference to the source, there's also a note about how it was used. And what should be included in that note or annotation is where it's used in your script, in your documentary script, how it was used, how it developed your understanding of the topic, and then how it contributes to your argument. So if you're including those things in your annotation, then that is both going to help you develop your understanding of this, as well as inform the reader of both the persistence and the depth of your research. So that pretty much concludes this session on what is the annotated bibliography, why is it necessary, and how do you write it.